Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper and look at the articles relevant for the mains as well as for the prelims examination. In all these articles, we shall try to extract only those portions which are relevant for your examination. We shall try to declutter them. And at the end of it, also try to take a look at some of the mains answer writing and how to go ahead with the answer writing schedule as well. Now, today we are going to have a discussion for close to around 15 different topics, six of them being relevant for your mains examination, which we will be discussing in slightly greater detail. Engage the Taliban, don't recognize them. This is an editorial piece article relevant for your GS paper 2. Then, cruising ahead, this is about the shipping facilities in India and how they need a revamp. For a long period of time, how the shipping sector has been ignored, due to which India has been suffering economically as well. So, this is again relevant for your GS paper 3. The vision of model youth Sabhas. This is again an editorial piece relevant for your GS paper 2. The pitfall of climate alarmism. What do we understand by the concept of climate alarmism? While that can be favorable in certain times, but how in the long run it can have a negative impact. So, what is climate alarmism? That is GS paper 3. Welfare dependency or governance reforms. Now, this is slightly a political piece talking about the Bihar elections, but out of it, we shall extract some of the basic concepts, such as what do we mean by multidimensional poverty index and how the electorate across our country, they are basically weighing their options based upon their day-to-day progress rather than the legacy coalitions. So this is something which we will extract the crux out of, relevant for your GS paper 2. Dredging corporation to get future ready. What do we understand by dredging? And when it comes to dredging, what is their role in environment, ecology, as well as overall in the economic sector? And where does Dredging Corporation of India stand today? And how does it stand to benefit our country in the long run? This is going to be relevant for your GS paper 3. Then, some of the topics that are there, we are going to discuss them for the prelims perspective, including ISRO's launch of India's heaviest communication satellite. So, on all these, we are going to discuss briefly for the prelims perspective. Now, having said that, and before coming to the first article, an announcement for all of you. 3rd, 4th, and 5th of November is when we are launching a special class festival. Now, all the learners and all the first time learners, you get an opportunity to understand the basic concepts from the best educators of the country. So today, you can attend the session that is at 6:30 p.m. Sarmat sir will be taking the session for reservation system in India. At 3 p.m., Abhishek sir will take you through the complete timeline and help you understand history through timeline. So please do not miss these sessions. If you are an aspirant, if you are a beginner, this is particularly curated for you. Now, having said that, we come on to the first topic of the day. Engage the Taliban, don't recognize them. Now, we are seeing a kind of increased conflict between Pakistan and Taliban, with the latest round of mediation coming to a standstill and almost a failure in Istanbul. Now, as a consequence of the skirmish between Afghanistan and Pakistan, there are many voices in our country which are talking about the fact that enemy of your enemy is a friend. So India should be a friend of Taliban and India should maintain much better relations with Taliban. Now, this is the article written in that context. Now, having said that, we have to keep one thing in mind that recently India had hosted the Taliban foreign minister Amir Khan Muttaqi. Now, that raised many eyebrows across the globe, but it was a kind of an outreach between India and Afghanistan after a long period of time. But when we talk about Afghanistan, the geopolitics in Afghanistan has taken a complete circle after around 20 to 30 years. Now, if you take a look at Afghanistan and the present and the evolving geopolitics, these couple of pictures, that tells you the story of the neighborhood. For those of us who are not aware about the importance of these pictures, the first picture basically indicates the picture or the image of the ex chief of ISI. Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, who visited Kabul upon the withdrawal of the NATO troops from Afghanistan. And in fact, ISI, that is the Pakistan's intelligence agency, was seen to be a key player in ousting NATO troops and ensuring that NATO did not get a decisive victory in Afghanistan. ISI also protected Taliban to a great extent during the time of the US onslaught. So that is when ISI was seen to be in cahoots or celebrating the ouster of the NATO troops. And that is when the ISI and the Pakistani government made statements that everything is going to be okay and Taliban is going to side with us. Now, this is the image at that point of time when the ISI chief visited Kabul. Now, this is the present image of the points of conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan. That is across the 2,600-kilometer odd length of the Durand Line, which was drawn way back in 1893. Now, that Durand Line is a point of conflict between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Mind you, Afghanistan has never recognized this Durand Line since 1948 and 1947 itself. In fact, Afghanistan was amongst the first countries and amongst the only countries which actually objected to the admission of Pakistan to United Nations because, as per Afghanistan, the boundary of Pakistan is doubtful, is dubious. So that is something that Pakistan has been dealing with in the past few months. The various different Taliban militias, various different Taliban fighters have been carrying on assault to the Pakistani army outposts and the various installations across the Durand Line. Pakistan, on its part, alleges that Afghanistan provides harbor and a kind of a safe refuge to the Pakistan Taliban or Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, which carries out attacks in their country. So these two countries are at loggerheads right now. So being from the best of the foes, best of the friends to the best of the enemies now, the turn has taken quite some time. But in this particular meanwhile, while the Taliban has come to power, the global geopolitics has been changing. Mind you, Taliban was in power prior to the US assault in Afghanistan as well. That is, in the 90s, Taliban came to power almost twice. At that point of time, during the 1994 and prior to that time as well, Taliban ousted the Northern Alliance ruling and the setup which was present there. India, for its part, and for those of you who are not aware about it, India, for its part, had always maintained very friendly relations with Northern Alliance. Now, presently, that Northern Alliance is not there as a power center in Afghanistan anymore. Most of the leaders, most of the members of Northern Alliance and the entire leadership, in fact, is in Tajikistan, refuge in Tajikistan. Right. So that is why India maintaining its relations with Northern Alliance is no longer an option. When it comes to Taliban and the Taliban ruled Afghanistan. Now, in that particular scenario, China, when it comes to the superpower in the region, now China has exchanged ambassadors with Taliban. Meaning what? It has given the official recognition to Taliban. Now, obviously, why has China done so? Because China is interested in gaining a strategic foothold in the region and thereby gaining access to Central Asia through this region. At the same time, China is deeply interested in the mineral resources which Afghanistan is abundant with. So that is why China has got a deep interest in recognizing Taliban. Other than that, Russia. Russia has also identified and basically recognized the Taliban government. Now, in the midst of this, there was an increased pressure on New Delhi that how to deal with Taliban. Now, when we talk about India and India's ties with Afghanistan, they have been very long, cultural, and historical. Now, from trade to people contacts to medical visas, Indian trade with and Indian ties with Afghanistan are very deep rooted. Having said that, presently India's ties with Afghanistan and India trying to improve its ties with Afghanistan and Taliban thereby, it has got three motives, three purposes. What are the three purposes? First of all, to secure its investments. What do we mean by that? To secure its investments. So basically, it has been estimated that between the year 2001 to 2021, India has invested close to around $3 billion. $3 billion in the form of dam construction, in the form of the parliament building, in the form of hospitals, in the form of schools. India has actually carried out a kind of welfareism model where it has tried to bring about investments in order to improve the life standards and the living conditions of the people in Afghanistan. India had not invested so much in deepening the military ties or going ahead with the arms distribution or going ahead with the training of the armed professionals, etc. It was up to a surface level, but the deeper investments were in the humanitarian missions. And India wants to secure them. India doesn't want them to be dismantled by the Taliban. Secondly, the second purpose is to deny Pakistan the strategic depth. Now, this is something that you oftentimes hear from Pakistan's literary circles. What do we understand by strategic depth? Now, this strategic depth, or the lack of this strategic depth, was severely exposed during Operation Sindoor. Now, in the 4 day skirmish that happened between India and Pakistan, you would be aware of the fact that by the third night, India had bombarded almost all the air bases to the east of River Indus. And if the skirmish could have carried out one or a couple of days more, India would have completely unraveled all the air bases which Pakistan has, even to the west of River Indus. Now, why am I saying east of Indus and west of Indus? Pakistan is also aware of the fact that it is very narrow strategically. It does not have greater amount of width. That is why you would hear the Field Marshal, Donald Trump's favorite Field Marshal, so to say, talking about the fact that the next time a war emerges, Pakistan will strike India's eastern part and southern part, where India stores its strategic assets. So it is always mindful of the fact that India has got a strategic depth, Pakistan does not have a strategic depth. So that is why the Pakistani policymakers and thinkers, for a long period of time, for decades, they have been thinking about the fact that if, let's suppose, push comes to shove, if war is on the offing, then Pakistan can utilize the Afghanistan's landscape in order to provide its military forces some amount of cushion. India does not want that. And that is where India does not want the Talibanis or the Taliban government as of now to have a very good kind of ties with Pakistan as well. Thirdly, it is to deny Afghanistan's use, Afghanistan's use by the militants, Afghanistan's use by terrorists. So it is a known fact that Pakistan has used Afghanistan as a training ground, as a training school for the militants. Even today, you do have reports of various different terrorist organizations like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, all of them carrying out these training camps beyond international scrutiny in the lands of Afghanistan. Once these terrorists and these militants they get trained, after that they are slowly and steadily infiltrated across India's border to carry out missions of terrorism in India. So Pakistan has been using Afghan land for a long period of time for the same purpose, and India does not want that to be repeated. That is why India wants good relations with Taliban. Mind you, it was the case of the Indian Airlines flight, which was hijacked, the Kathmandu to Delhi flight, which was hijacked and taken to Kandahar. And that was again under the aegis and under the protectorate of Taliban. So India doesn't want a repeat of those nightmare situations. That is why India wants better ties with Taliban. Now, having said that, as the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan or the Pakistani Taliban, they are carrying out attacks from the Afghan land into Pakistan. That is why Pakistan thinks it is only India which could do so, because Pakistan had been following the same policy for decades. And that is why Taliban is back in global spectrum. But mind you, there is another aspect associated with it. A recent finding by the Hudson Institute, and in fact, a detailed publication by the Hudson Institute, it talked about the fact that Pakistan could be riling up the issue of Taliban and Afghanistan issue across the world. It could be bringing it under global spotlight for one reason. Whenever Afghanistan has been unstable, and whenever there have been global superpowers involved in Afghanistan, Pakistan has behaved like a rentier state. That means the global superpowers like the US, all of them, they have poured in billions and billions of dollars into Pakistan, and Pakistan has benefited from it and gained from it. And that is why, presently, as Pakistan goes through its again fresh economic turmoil and economic crisis, it wants more billions of dollars to be secured. And that is where it is bringing the global attention that look at the situation in Afghanistan, look at what Taliban is doing. It is also a threat of Islamic State. And that is why we are the front runners in the fight against the Taliban in order to gain and galvanize global support. So that is the broader geopolitical spectrum associated with Taliban. Now, having said that, India and Afghanistan, after the Taliban came into power, now India was initially reluctant to engage with Taliban. Now, slowly and steadily, it has started to uplift its ties. India has upgraded its consuls in the region of Afghanistan. And meanwhile, there's a wait and watch policy which is going on between India and Taliban, both of them. Now, it is not to the level of sending ambassadors to each other. It has not been elevated to the level of, let's suppose, the embassies operating in each other's countries like China or Russia are doing with Taliban. But nonetheless, there is a kind of increased recognition of Taliban. Now, that does provide us some with certain opportunities, but it is also fraught with a lot of risk. So that is something that India has to be wary about. We have to understand that presently Taliban needs India much more than India needs Taliban. How? Because think about it, if India recognizes Taliban, now that will give it a kind of a backing of a major democracy. Till now, Russia, China, they are backing and they have recognized Taliban, but they are considered to be autocracies or dictatorships, authoritarian regimes across the global political system. So recognition by the largest democracy of the world will do much good to the reputation of Taliban. That is why Taliban wants India to further improve and escalate the ties and further provide it with the better recognition. Now that is something which India has to be wary about. Why? The reasons are that even today, Taliban is one of the most regressive regimes that the world has seen. Now, it is the only regime in the world which openly talks about not having any role of women or girls when it comes to governance, when it comes to education, when it comes to economy. So, it is regressive in terms of women's participation. Women's participation. They have been disbarred from educational institutions, from the aspect of jobs, and even other economic activities. As a consequence of that, the region of Afghanistan has seen its economy shrink by one third, shrink by one third, which is massive. Millions of Afghans, even today, they are needing assistance, humanitarian assistance, right? And mind you, Afghanistan is also one of those countries which is bearing the brunt of climate change. So, crop failures, droughts, famines, these are becoming very common. So, humanitarian assistance is still very much needed. Humanitarian relief. And this is where India can invest in terms of humanitarian relief, in setting up hospitals, in providing the kind of facilities like the CT scan machines, MRI machines that India has committed to provide. And that is a correct strategy to think about it. And it is not the case that Afghanistan today is free from all the various terrorist networks. Now, after 2001 attack on in the US, That is when Taliban did realize that its failure was not based upon how it was governing Afghanistan. The failure of Taliban was based on the fact that it was seen to be completely in alliance with groups like Al Qaeda. And that is when the global anger rose against Al Qaeda. It was directed against Taliban as well. So this time, Taliban is much more careful. It is not having a kind of an open relation or, so to say, an overt relation with Al Qaeda anymore. But having said that, it is a known fact that various different terrorist organizations like Al Qaeda, Lashkar e Toiba, then you have Tehrik e Taliban Pakistan, Jaish e Mohammed, all of them, they still continue to operate freely in the region of Afghanistan. The only large transnational terrorist network which is not operating and which is against Taliban is the case of ISIS, Islamic State. Islamic State is against the rise or the governance of Taliban. Even Haqqani Network, the dreaded terrorist organization which was sheltered in Pakistan for a long period of time, that is also still operating in Afghanistan. To a country, a regime which is still supporting so many terrorist activities, India would not, or it would not suit India's image and long term goals. Forget about image, India's long term strategic ambitions as well, to be in support and to give a global recognition to this particular regime. As Taliban is requiring greater help from India as compared to what India requires out of Taliban, this is the time that India can push for some amount of concessions for the people of Afghanistan. India can, in a way, exert pressure along with the other countries of the world in order to bring about some amount of humanitarian relief and some developmental work in Afghanistan. Mind you, it is the when we talk about the global democracies, there's a large setback with the Trump administration in US. Now, Trump administration in US is such a transactional administration that if tomorrow Taliban grants it a supply of critical mineral resource, then for Trump, Taliban will be the best regime out there in the world. So that is a kind of an aberration that the global geopolitics is facing. But the ties between the countries, the ties between the regimes, they are not meant to be happening for a couple of years. They happen for long term purposes. That is why India has to be very, very careful in recalibrating its ties with Afghanistan and more specifically with Taliban. Okay, so that is the gist of this article from the initial portion. Now, obviously, the initial portion, the Duran line, etc., are not mentioned in the article, but this is to give you a background about what the geopolitical situation around Taliban has been and how it has been evolved. Now, having said that, we come to the second article, Cruising Ahead. Now, this is about India's shipping sector. Now, India's shipping sector has been in poor form for a long period of time. We have seen that our neighbor, that is China, China has been creating container capacities, which is largest in the world. Every year, China is adding container capacity almost equal to the rest of the world itself. So, in a way, it is dominating the trade. Why? Because when we talk about trade, global trade, now in global trade, majority of the global trade by volume, that is something which is carried out by the seas, isn't it? For that, what do you need? The shipping containers, and you need larger ships, right? You need the oil carriers. Now, think about it. For a country like India, which is import dependent when it comes to fossil fuels, in order to maintain its energy security, we are import dependent. But we don't have enough container ships in our country. Taken all together, we have less than 1,500 of the operational ships to carry cargo container from one place to another, which is woefully short. Now, we end up giving out, and the minister has provided this statement in public as well, that Indian companies shell out close to around 80 to 85 billion dollars annually. And that is something which, in terms of the shipping containers and in terms of giving that money to other countries in order to carry their products. Now, imagine If India would have its own shipping containers, India would have developed its own shipping liners, then India would have gained economically and India would have leveraged that for global dominance. Presently, our share in the global shipping lanes is in a low single digit percentage. China, around 30 to 40 years ago, was in in a similar position as we were. But then they expanded, and that is where their export sector also expanded simultaneously. Now, in our country, the story of the shipping sector has been that of a declining power. Now, why? That is, the article argues that ever since the LPG reforms, liberalization, privatization, and globalization reforms of 1991, now the Shipping Corporation of India has been ignored. Now, many of the PSUs were ignored and have been ignored for a long period of time. Now, after this, the Shipping Corporation of India has seen a decline in terms of maintenance, in terms of capital allocation. Capital allocation. What do we mean by capital allocation? Providing enough money in order to build the ships, right? So there has been a decline in terms of capital allocation. As a consequence, there has been a decline in capacity, the number of ships. Now, when you have a decline in capacity, the domestic companies, will they still rely on Shipping Corporation of India? No. So that is when due to the capacity decline, foreign carriers, foreign carriers, they were relied upon, and they have been carrying out the bulk of trade. And the article argues that this is because of faulty policies, faulty government policies. Ah, so basically, what various different governments across the world they end up doing is that if you want to improve your own shipping container, the PSU, you should provide them with a kind of a concession that, let's suppose, if you transport oil from the ship which is owned by Shipping Corporation of India, you will be provided some discount in terms of the tax or the tariffs. Now, if you provide that, gives an incentive for the various companies to rely upon the shipping containers. And Shipping Containers of India, when they would see an increase in demand, that is when they would increase their capacity of production as well. And that could have led to healthy growth. But over a period of time, lack of incentives, right? Particularly, let's suppose in general trade, general trade, and even when it comes to oil trade. That has led to a decline in the Shipping Corporation of India, which has led to the situation that we are in today. Now, this is not something which can be turned overnight, mind you. It is not the case that today a country decides that we are going to be a superpower in shipping liners, and 1 year down the line, you are manufacturing ships. It is not like manufacturing a cotton fabric. In order to manufacture a ship and get us a kind of a manufacturing line or a plant in setup, now that can take more than a decade easily. So even if today, as the government is focusing upon improving the capacity of the shipping containers, the tangible outcome of it is something which won't be visible prior to 2035. So that is the gestation period, because you need enough demand, you need enough amount of order book, and only then a company will invest in improving the dry docks, improving the maintenance facilities, in building the manufacturing capability. Then the manufacturing order will be released, then the tenders will happen. After that, the maintenance or the construction will begin. So it is a long term and a long drawn process. We have been lagging behind for many decades, so to say. Countries, smaller nations like South Korea, they have become giants in global shipping, whereas larger countries like India, we pride ourselves on the fact that we are soon to become the third largest economy of the world. We are lagging behind quite precariously. Now, what has been done for a long period of time is that we have carried out the training, right? Training of professionals. That is something that we have only focused upon. Now, not to say that the training of professionals should not be carried upon, but then along with that, the focus could also have been on the building of the shipping liners. That is what the article argues. The only focus on training of professionals means that these professionals, the trained professionals that you have, they don't find enough job opportunities in the available shipping liners within India because there is a limited capacity. That is why they end up serving abroad. The same Indian professionals you will find working across the Chinese shipping liners, the Korean shipping liners, and so on. So that is again a kind of a talent pool which is wasted. Now, the government has initiated a series of measures now in order to improve the maritime connectivity and the maritime capacity of the country. The government basically has brought about a kind of a ownership, land ownership model, or what is referred to as landlord model. Now, landlord model, so to say, what is it about? Now, in this, the revenue is shared. Revenue is shared with private companies, private and foreign companies for terminal operation. Okay, so for terminal operation, any port terminal that you are using, right? For that, the revenue which is generated will be provided to the private company operating that or any other company which is operating that. As a consequence of that, what has happened is that the ports, they are earning good amount of money now. The ports are turning out to be financially healthy, slowly and steadily. Now, the outcome of that has been that ports like Chennai and Kolkata, ports like Chennai and Kolkata, now they have started to invest. Chennai and Kolkata, they have started to invest. Invest where? Invest in the other different regions to explore the port facilities, transshipment hubs in the Andamans, for example. Transshipment hubs in Andaman. Okay. So they are investing in that. And as a consequence, India's own trading capabilities will improve. When the ports get healthy financially, that is when you will have better utilization, shorter turnaround time, better logistic facility, and more shipping liners will come to those ports because the ports will become much more lucrative. And that will be for the economic advantage of that. Now, India has also been investing in various initiatives for port-led development, like you have the Sagarmala, right? Sagarmala project. Now, what is Sagarmala project? Now, this is a project which was launched almost a decade back in order to lead or create a port-led development model where development of industries, logistics park, communication network, better infrastructure of connectivity, for example, rail network, etc., and also providing training and skill development to the local population. That are the four pillars of the Sagarmala initiative. Now, this would bring about or usher in an era of prosperity in the region of the ports. So that is also where the government has been investing, right? So Sagarmala initiatives, then the seafarer training. Other than that, you do have to provide much more financial incentive and much more initiatives to be provided for the shipping, which has largely been ignored. So that is the case of this entire article. Now, why is this important for India is something that you have to understand in a gist. Please understand something. Any country which grows economically means what? The trade will grow. Only then will it grow economically, isn't it? Domestic trade can only have so much amount of limitations, or domestic market will always have limitations. Even in terms of domestic market, let's suppose we are talking about inland waterways, development of trade and trading routes. Let's suppose through the national waterways like across River Ganga, across River Brahmaputra, and so on. In all these trading mechanisms, The cheapest and the most eco-friendly manner of trade is not the roadways, is not the railways, is the waterways, be it overseas or be it inland. Now, in order to capitalize on these waterway network, you cannot be dependent on foreign players. And this is something that India was made acutely aware of, particularly during the COVID times, when majority of the shipping containers across the world were booked by their own home countries. That is when India's supply chains they faced a major shock. So that is something that India doesn't want to be repeated, or any country which is ambitious for development should not or cannot see that to be repeated. That is why India needs to develop its own healthy shipping arm, and the Shipping Corporation of India has to be a lighthouse in that developmental process. Okay, so that is the gist of the article. So, practice question. So, discuss the relevance of shipping sector in India as India aims to grow economically. This is a 10 marker question. Now, when we talk about the intro of this answer, how do you write the intro? So, in the intro, you talk about the case that majority of the shipping or majority of the global trade presently is handled by the sea route or handled by the waterways, right? So relevance of waterways. That is how you can initiate the answer. That will be your intro. Then in the body portion, talk about the fact, about start with the importance of the shipping sector for India. Importance. How? Importance for. So, in that, what are the factors that you discuss? In this, the first factor that you will be discussing is the case of increased trade possibilities, trade possibilities, right? Then you will be talking about inland waterways utilization, inland waterways. Then, after that, supply chain resilience, supply chain resilience. That is something which has to be mentioned. Okay. Then talk about meeting global demands, global demands. Then after that, talk about the fact that this is a labor intensive sector. So it will provide employment, labor intensive. So all the various different advantages that are accrued, that is something which can be mentioned. Now, once you have mentioned that, then after that, in the same body portion, talk about the challenges. Challenges. In the challenges, what do you write? That we are woefully short of the various different shipping liners, and the capacity addition is very restricted. The ports, majority of them, they are running in losses, so the financial health is not well. These are some of the factors that you write, and the conclusion has to take a form of way forward. So, in the conclusion, mention the government initiatives, maritime vision for Amrit Kal. Now, thereby, there is a huge capital infusion worth lakhs of crores. Talk about the Sagarmala initiative. Now, all these have to or are initiated by the government, but further incentivization for the sector has to be done in order to make it robust and ready for a future economically well developed. So that is how you can carry out the entire answer writing. Write it on your own as well, and thereafter you can come to a better conclusion. Okay. Yes, those factors, Vikas, correct. 200 plus major and minor ports, all of those factors you can highlight. Very good. Now, the next article, that is the vision for model youth Gram Sabhas. Now, what is this article about? Giving you the backdrop of it. So, the article talks about the fact that across the entirety of the country, you will find that when it comes to raising awareness amongst the youth for the democratic setup of our country, you basically have youth parliaments, isn't it? You have the Bal Sansad, youth parliament. You have MUN, model UN, where the children and the kids and the youth they participate. They carry out healthy debates, And that is when their understanding of the democratic setup further improves, their awareness level improves. But you don't have something of the same sort when it comes to Gram Sabhas or even Panchayat. You don't have youth Panchayat or youth Gram Sabhas. And this is the kind of issue that the article has highlighted. Because when it comes to democracy, the actual penetrative arm of democracy is the case of Gram Sabhas, the Gram Panchayats that you have. Now, this is something which is included in Article 243A of the Constitution, which was provided as per the 73rd Amendment Act, Amendment Act of 1992. Now, that is when, in order to provide further deeper penetration to democracy, India came up with the kind of local governance structures in urban areas as well as in rural areas. Majority of the population of our country, almost 65% as per the last census, still resides in rural areas. So that is why we talk about the Gram Sabhas and Gram Panchayats for a bit. Now, even today, and that is what the article argues as well, that if you ask an individual that who do you want to be in terms of if they are interested in politics, they will never say that I want to be a sarpanch or I want to participate in Gram Sabha. All that they are aware of is an MLA or an MP. They are not even aware about the functionality of the sarpanch. What is the role that the sarpanch plays? But in reality, Gram Sabhas carry too much amount of and substantial amount of power. It is the utilization of power which is not happening. Now, what is constituted by these Gram Sabhas? So, when we talk about Gram Sabhas, it does represent every registered voter in a village and does empower them to deliberate, to discuss, to arrive at a consensus for budgets, development plans, and even for the governance prerogatives. So, that is basically the case of the Gram Sabha. Now, it embodies participatory democracy, empowering rural citizens to shape decisions affecting their community, bringing about transparency and accountability. The role of Gram Sabhas, when we talk about the role of Gram Sabhas, it is immense. How? So basically, these Gram Sabhas, they help you or they allow a kind of participatory decision making, which means what? That the decision is not imposed, the decision is arrived out of the local population. Then, development for the people. You focus on those areas which the local population requires for the people, isn't it? For example, drinking water supply, drinking water, schools, sanitation, and so on. So that is what is focused upon, isn't it? Then there is a also Gram Sabhas act as centers for conflict resolution. Whenever you have lot of conflict in the local amongst the local population in any area, Gram Sabhas, they serve as a perfect tool, a perfect medium for conflict resolution. Okay. Then allocation of village resources, forest resources, etc. Allocation of resources in the village. That is also something which is handled by the Gram Sabhas. Even when it comes to mineral resources, etc., the Gram Sabhas have a greater say. So these Gram Sabhas, they are very vital in the healthy functioning of a democracy. And that is why the most important of them is transparency, transparency, accountability, okay? Accountability for what? Accountability of the budget which is utilized, how much money is utilized, and so. Now, In this scenario, it is important to raise awareness amongst the local population, amongst the youthful population in particular, for these Gram Panchayats and the Gram Sabhas as well. That is where the Model Youth Gram Sabha initiative has been launched by the Ministry of Panchayati Raj in collaboration with Ministry of Education, Ministry of Tribal Welfare, and the Aspirational Bharat Collaborative. So that is where the Model Youth Gram Sabha was launched in 2025. Now, in this, people or the students or the youth, they play various different roles. There, some of them or few of them will become sarpanch. Some of them will act as the normal Gram Sabha participants. Some of them will act as engineers, and they will participate in a healthy debate, thinking about what should be the outcome. They will deliberate upon the outcome. Now, certificates are also awarded as per this in order to provide recognition and in order to encourage a healthy participation in these initiatives as well. So that is as per the Model Youth Gram Sabhas. For this, however, you need trained teachers as well in order to play their role. And that is where it is supported by teacher training and offers incentives such as prizes and certificates. Okay, so that is the case of the entire Model Youth Gram Sabha. Now, it is not something which has been rolled out across the country. You had pilot projects of the Model Youth Gram Sabha, which was initiated in certain schools of the country, like Rajasthan, in Bundi, etc. And now the phase one has been launched. Now, in the phase one, it is being launched in over 1,000 schools across the 28 states and the 8 UTs, and more than 600 Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas, 200 Eklavya Model Residential Schools, and few of the select Zilla Parishad schools in Maharashtra. Now, this, how the rollout has been, this becomes relevant for your prelims, because a multi-statement question can be framed from this, that it has been rolled out, it has been implemented for a planned period XYZ, and it is present Zilla Parishads schools across the country. It is not so. A team of 126 master trainers is leading the nationwide teacher training, which is also required. 1,238 teachers have been trained from 24 states and union territories till now. And slowly and steadily, this will be further spread. So that is the role of the future of the model youth Ram Sabhas. And that is where it has got a much greater role, not only in terms of awareness, right? But also in terms of understanding participatory governance. Understanding participatory governance. What do we mean by participatory governance? For example, when we talk about, let's suppose, the developmental requirements, it is not the role of the government sitting on top alone. It is the role of the local citizens like you and me as well. And most of the people, they are not aware of this, that what is their role in a democracy. Majority of the population, when you talk about the rural areas, they are not aware about the power, the importance, and the role of the Gram Sabha. The curriculum has also largely ignored that. So once you have these model youth Gram Sabhas spread across the rural and the state schools as well, which is slated to be rolled out in phase two, so that is when people will get to know about their own, okay, how to allocate resources in a particular region, how to hold the budgets of the local population to be accountable, how to hold the sarpanch to be accountable. That is how it will further deepen the roots of our democratic setup. Okay, now after that, let's take a look at the question. Discuss the role of gram sabhas in deepening democracy in the country. What are the measures which can be taken to further their importance? So when we talk about the intro of this, talk about Article 243A, 43A, and the 73rd Amendment, Amendment 1992. Okay, talk about this. That how Article 243A and the 73rd Amendment provided for the local governance structure to be established in our country, and provided for the establishment of Gram Sabhas across the country. Then, after that, for a brief moment in the body portion, talk about what are Gram Sabhas? What are they? So, you talk about all the registered voters being a participant and being the members in the Gram Sabha. After that, role of Gram Sabhas. Okay, that is something that you mention. Then, challenges. What are the challenges? People are not aware, largely ignored, and there's a kind of an oversight when it comes to the financial allocation, when it comes to participatory governance. And then, what are the measures? So, in the measures, one of the measures you mention model youth Gram Sabha. Okay, and that eventually in the conclusion also you can further focus upon that the development or the further deepening of the democracy and the democratic setup cannot be thought about without a functional role of the Gram Sabha, and that is how you can conclude the answer. Okay, now after this, the pitfalls of climate alarmism. Now, this article basically talks about climate alarmism and how Bill Gates, as a philanthropist, has basically changed his discourse over the past few years when it comes to climate change and how that affects the larger fight against climate change. Now, climate change is a reality, and that is something that, unless and until you are Donald Trump, you don't deny that. You cannot deny that. The cloud bursts, the cyclones, the monsoons, the storms, all of them are evidences of climate change. And that is happening. So basically, what do we understand by the climate alarmist? Now, climate alarmist, the article argues that people like Bill Gates, they have been climate alarmists for a very long period of time. Back in 2019, that is when Bill Gates had said that if climate change is not catered to right now, if it is not paid attention to right now, that is when the entire world can collapse and the living species can die. So that is climate alarmism. Climate alarmism basically means that increasing or raising alarm levels for climate change, predicting a doomsday scenario. That is the end of the world, a doomsday scenario. Okay. That the world is going to come to an end. And it is not something which is new in present day and age. If you roll back the times and you open up the older newspaper archives of 1950 and 1960, many of the climate scientists would talk about the fact that the world will cease to exist by the year 1990 or 2000. The entire world will be flooded by the year 2020 or 2010. So there have been alarmists for a long period of time. Now, what happens in the case of climate alarmists is that it does galvanize or it does mobilize the people to carry out some action against climate change in a short run. But when they see that 2 years, 3 years, nothing has happened, then after that, they stop believing in the idea of climate change. For example, let's suppose I tell you, if let's suppose you are an individual living in an open house, I tell you that if you don't construct the barricades, tigers will come in and will kill you, right? Immediately, you will start building the barricades and the boundaries with greater amount of alarm and greater rush. But after, let's suppose, 1 year has passed, 2 years have passed, 3 years have passed, no tiger has visited, then you will think that that person was making a fool out of me. There is no tiger in this region, and that person was forcing me to channelize all the resource in constructing a boundary. I could have used the resource for myself. So, in the fourth year onwards, you will not invest anything in building a boundary at all. So, that is what the alarmist situation does. So, alarmists, they mobilize mobilize action that is associated with climate. So they mobilize climate action in the short run. After that, complacency, complacency, and disillusionment in the long run. Right? Which means what? That you stop believing in the entire idea altogether, that there is nothing known as climate change. Now, Bill Gates in 2019 had said that if the world does not take action against climate change, the world will come to an end. Now, recently, same Bill Gates has issued a statement that climate change is a reality. The world is warming up. But humans won't die. It is not the case that humans will be eradicated due to climate change. Humans will adapt or will modify their habitat. If, however, and he also went ahead to say that if, however, we eradicate poverty, right? How? By empowering the local population, by vaccination. If we do this, then it will be in the long run benefit of the human race and it will help the people fight against climate change. So this is seen as the by the people as a shifting of the goalpost. So much so that Donald Trump has said this statement by Bill Gates is a victory against the conspirators, climate change conspiracies. So basically, Donald Trump is saying that look, after I have come to power, people like Bill Gates, who were earlier indulging in climate conspiracies, talking about climate change, now they are saying that reduce poverty. So there's a disillusionment in the long run. So that is why, if we want to carry out a meaningful fight against climate change, than being alarmist, we have to focus on the long-term agenda of reduction of emissions and so on. Reduction of emissions is something which is not happening based upon the data indicated by the various different climate analytics groups and so on. The reduction of emission is something which is not happening to a great extent. So reduction of emission, adoption of renewables. So that is something which has to be promoted in the long run. We don't have to be alarmist. We don't have to be complacent. Something in between both of them, right? So that is going to give a long-term output and a long-term favorable outcome as well. So that is the case of this entire article, which is woven around the climate alarmism. Now, mind you, just for those of you who are unaware about it, that eradication of poverty, removal of inequality, and vaccination, these are the factors which had been highlighted in the Johannesburg summit, or which was held after the Rio summit, obviously, as one of the major factors which would be useful in the fight against climate change. Because why? When we talk about climate change, see, and this is an important logical aspect to understand. Something not mentioned in the article, though, something beyond the article, but relevant for your examination, however. When we talk about climate change, I hope all of us will agree that we need the conservation of forests as natural sinks for carbon dioxide absorption and removal of greenhouse gases. Now, these conservation of forest, conservation of wildlife will be done by people who are well off or people who are absolutely poor. In majority of the cases across the world, it has been witnessed that people who face poverty, who face inequality, they want to raise their income levels. And in order to raise their income levels, they carry out activities like extension of agriculture, right? Extraction of forest resources, extraction of forest resources. Now, as a consequence of both these activities, it leads to deforestation. And whenever you have deforestation leads to emission of CO2 equivalent, something that we have discussed in the monthly current affairs on Saturday on YouTube as well. So you can check out that as also. So both of these will lead to deforestation. How can you prevent them? So you can prevent them if everyone is well off. You remove poverty. How do you remove poverty? You try to bring about policies to remove inequality, to remove the out of pocket health expenditure by providing vaccination. So, all these activities will galvanize better environmental protection as well. So, what Bill Gates might be signaling to in the case of the Trump administration is, see, in the case of Trump administration, you cannot afford to openly say that, look, climate change is a reality and expect Trump to be kind to you. But in the face of such kind of situation from the administration, Bill Gates might be referring to the fact, given that he has been a credible philanthropist over the past decade and a half, that, look, remove poverty, remove inequality, and then maybe the issue of climate change can be solved. Okay. Now, then coming on to the next article, welfare dependency or governance reform. Now, this is a political article talking about the case of NDA, the National Democratic Alliance, Mahagathbandhan, the opposition alliance, their activities, and so on. As the state of Bihar, one of the most politically charged state of the country, as it goes for polls in this month, that is where all the eyes are upon how the electorate reacts and on what basis the electorate provides or gives votes. Because, mind you, the entire paradigm of the elections nowadays in electoral democracies, particularly in India, we have seen a kind of a tectonic shift. People earlier, if you roll back the clock maybe 3 to 4 decades, people would always tend to vote based upon the kinship, based upon the caste alliance, based upon the kind of coalition alliance, and so on. Nowadays, electorate has been alleged to be much more transactional in nature. That is where the welfare dependency has been in question. Welfare dependency. That is, what is the welfare that you provide? If you come to power, what is it that you will give me? And that is what has led to a mad rush and a mad competition between the political parties vying for power for giving about a kind of a distributive welfareism, where somebody will announce, I will give 2,500 rupees, somebody else will announce, I will give 5,000 rupees, somebody else will announce, I will give you 10,000 rupees, so on and so forth. It is a race to the bottom. The state's financial resources are drained. Absolutely. So that is something which has been witnessed in many parts of the country and is being witnessed in the state of Bihar as well. Having said that, despite all of this, despite the case of the governance models which are being pitched, etc., the Multidimensional Poverty Index report, which had been released recently, talks about the state of Bihar as still one of the worst performers in the social indicators, one of the worst performers in the economic indicators as well. The growth rate is there, the economic growth rate is high, but the base is so low, and still you don't have enough meaningful jobs which are created. So that is where the electoral prerogative has to be balanced between structural reforms and distributive welfareism. Distributive welfareism. Now, here, when we talk about structural reforms, what do we mean by structural reforms? Analyze it with the whichever state you belong from. You would identify that whichever state that you belong from needs some changes, needs some development. So, structural reforms largely talk about the case of uh, better healthcare, right? Then you have better education, right? Improving the literacy rate, then reduction of rural urban divide, reducing migration, then after that, infrastructure, then after that, industrial policy, then after that, reforms in agriculture, reforms in agriculture, and all of them. So that is the kind of structural reforms. And on the other hand, distributive welfareism talks about that look, I have, when I come to power, because you guys are suffering from abject poverty, I will give you 5,000 rupees. I will give you so much amount of money, and I will make this free, that free. So that is where you provide subsidy and basically money directly into the accounts. Now, please understand, distributive welfareism has also got a role to play. It is not the case that it is an absolute evil. In a very poor state like a state like Bihar or a state like Odisha or Jharkhand for that matter, if you consider, the per capita income is so low, the amount of money available with people is so low that they cannot make basic life choices. For example, if I can have better clothes or so on. So that is when the smallest and the meager amount of money which is given to them, that can be very helpful. But having said that, when you go for distributive welfareism, it limits your ability to carry out structural reforms as a state government. We have seen that with the certain states in the southern part of the country, which basically have gone for distributive welfareism, not only in southern, in other parts of the country as well. Madhya Pradesh, for example, is one of those which is suffering from the case of distributive welfareism. Karnataka is another one of those states which is suffering from the case of distributive welfareism. And here, it is important for you as a candidate to be aware about the global models as well. We talk about China. We talk about the China's development. Now, if you take a look at Chinese economy through the 70s and the 80s during the era of Deng Xiaoping, now that is the time when China really opened up for the world as well. And that is when China embarked upon a kind of a growth journey which made it a superpower today. Now, at that point of time, India and China were at the almost similar places. Now, what is the policy that India followed? Now, India followed a policy of a kind of a distributive welfare, focusing more upon giving money to the people, giving money, giving food grains, etc. Subsidies were very high, and so on. China, what did it do? China had limited amount of resources. The first thing that China did, it basically rationalized all the government sector undertakings that it had. Overnight, within a span of a couple of years, China managed to fire around 18 million people from the government jobs because they were overstaffed and they were not efficient. All the people, they were asked in a way to seek job employment in the eastern coastal area because that is where job opportunities were being created. Now, who was creating these job opportunities? As a government, China had lesser amount of money at that point of time. So whatever money it had, it invested in developing the capacity infrastructure across the eastern coastline. And that is when regions like Tianjin, regions like Shanghai, all of them, they started developing. When they started developing, people could find jobs. And people, when they could find jobs, that basically brought about a kind of much better livelihood standards. And that brought up the economy to grow. So while China brought about a kind of a market oriented socialism, India indulged in a kind of a distributive mechanism of socialism, which is why we see a deviation in terms of the path of development. And that is the same thing which the states are also indulging in. Having said that, the Multidimensional Poverty Index report has indicated that Bihar still is the laggard in terms of social and economic indicators. For your prelims and for your mains perspective, it is important to know what is that Multidimensional Poverty Index. So it measures the level or the quantum of poverty based upon the health condition, education situation, and the living standards. In the health, nutrition availability, child mortality are the factors which are considered. In education, years, average mean years of schooling, then school attendance. And in living standards, the type of cooking fuel which is used, availability or unavailability of sanitation facilities, drinking water facility, is it available or not, electricity facility, housing facility, assets. What are the domestic assets that you have? So, based upon this, you have a rating between 0 to 1, and the states and the regions, the districts are also awarded with the multidimensional poverty index. It has been witnessed that despite the state being very, very poor, the interests of the electorate that differs from one region to another. Many of the urban centers across the country, it has been observed, they do vote for the infrastructure development. When you have development like, let's suppose, metro facilities which are made available, that is when you tend to choose the government in power. Then, still, many of them vote the governments out of power based upon lack of industrial jobs. Industrial jobs, right? So, as a consequence, the argument and the conclusion can be that voting in the present day paradigm is done mostly based upon the tangible outcomes. The electorate is youthful. So, when the electorate is youthful and you have a larger young population, the women population being a majority of the electorate when it comes to states like Bihar, the electorate is transactional. They need the meaningful jobs, they need the visible infrastructure, and that is what they are favoring rather than favoring the caste politics and rather than favoring the age old caste coalitions. That is what the article has to tell you in a nutshell. Okay. Now, after this, we come to one of the topics about the Dredging Corporation to get future ready. Now, next year, Dredging Corporation of India Limited will celebrate 50 years since its inception. Now, over the past 50 years, the company has grown, the corporation has grown, but obviously it has got a lot of limitations. Recently, that is in the past few weeks, you had for the first time a capital infusion worth 4,000 crores, which is the largest in the history of this corporation, which was provided as per Maritime Amritkal, Maritime Amritkal Vision. Amritkal Vision. Okay. So that has basically provided a shot in the arm for the DCIL. DCIL presently carries out maintenance dredging, then capital dredging, then deepening dredging across the shoreline, and so on. So, what is this dredging? For those of us who are unaware about dredging, let us understand that. So, dredging is nothing but digging of the coastal areas and digging of the seabed in a. It need not only be the seabed, it can be the case of the riverbed also. So, what you have is basically a large ship or a large barge which is stationary in a region. They carry out a cutter and that digs out the marine sediments or the riverine sediment. And after that, they can also pick it out with the help of a crane. And that is how they deepen the water depth. Now, why do you need the water to be deeper? In order to allow for larger ships to berth in the region. So, understand, for example, let's suppose you have a coastal area. Let's suppose a port. Take the case of the Ennore port in Tamil Nadu, Kamrajar port. Now, Kamrajar port is quite infamous for being very shallow. Very periodically, you have so much amount of deposits, right? Coastal deposits keep on happening. So, as these coastal deposits they keep on happening, so the larger ships they cannot come closer to the port areas. Only the smaller ships can. So that is why timely maintenance and dredging activities are required. So that is why you carry out dredging. Periodic dredging and desiltation also ensures that the rivers they don't overflow and there is no flooding. So there is a greater role for DCIL to play, but then DCIL doesn't have enough money or did not have enough money. Now, you need to know about the benefits of dredging as well. So, it creates waterways like canal networks, ensures the maintenance of the river channels, reopening of them, restoring the shorelines as compared to the huge amount of sediment deposits, maintaining the ecosystems, the coastal ecosystem. If it gets too shallow, you will not have many of the marine organisms being able to survive in that area, gathering construction materials which have been deposited, or even the extraction of those river sands, etc., removing trash and pollutants and the debris, reconfiguring the waterways, changing their pathways, increasing waterway depth, mining for metals, and ecological restoration. So there are many, many benefits out of dredging. Now, role of dredging corporation. as India tends to or seeks to expand its role in terms of the maritime sector, in terms of the overall shipping industry, we need to have well maintained ports, and we need newer ports as well. So, development of development of newer ports, right? Maintenance of the older ports as well. Then inland water navigation, right? Ecological maintenance across the coastal areas. For all of that, dredging corporation is relevant. So, out of this article, what do you extract? What is dredging? What is its role? And what is the benefit of the Dredging Corporation of India Limited? Okay. Now, coming to certain articles relevant for your prelims purposes, ISRO launches advanced satellite, that is GSAT 7R, India's heaviest communication satellite till now, launched from our own coastal areas or our own territory. Now, ISRO basically used the LVM-3, that is what has also been nicknamed as Bahubali, India's heaviest rocket lift, in order to launch this satellite. Now, it has been placed in the geosynchronous orbit. After this, now because it was so heavy, around 4,000 kilograms and more, so it is immediately placed in the geosynchronous orbit. But after some time, the satellite which has got the propulsion systems built within it, that will further maneuver itself to accommodate in the perfect orbital setup. So that is the case of the satellite launch. Now, this is very vital in terms of developing the parameters for the launch vehicle as well. Mind you, as many times as you use the launch vehicles, you understand the robustness of it, you understand the reliability of it. India has a reliable workhorse in the form of PSLV. This is much more heavier. The GSLVs are much more heavier and able to place much heavier objects. Now, India, as it basically aims to launch the Gaganyaan mission by 2027 and also have its own station going ahead into the future, India needs these kind of rockets and much more of these kind of launches to be tested. Having said that, what is the benefit of this satellite? And what is the utility of this satellite? This satellite will replace the GSAT 7, which was there earlier. And it is basically for naval communication. Naval communication. It is for obviously the armed forces, that is the Navy, for reliable communication between the satellite and the data centers and the submarines, the warships, and ensure a reliable communication even in adverse circumstances. So that is the role of the satellite for naval communication, and this is the satellite launch vehicle. Okay. Then, experts join hands for Ramsar site tag for wetlands in Assam sanctuary. So basically, in Assam till now, you have only one Ramsar site. That is the region of Dipur Bil. Dipur. In the entirety of Northeast, if you think about it, there are only two Ramsar sites. One is Dipur Bil, another is Loktak Lake in Manipur. Right? Deepur Beel had been facing a lot of pollution, and that is why the migratory birds were not coming there for a long period of time. Now, when we talk about a wetland is a kind of an ecosystem where terrestrial plants can also grow, and you have a lot of support for water birds as well as for species of fishes. So, this is a vital part of the ecosystem. This helps in water retention, groundwater recharge, flood prevention, and also for the maintenance of ecosystem, water purification, and so on. Now, how is a wetland identified as a Ramsar site, or when is a wetland identified as a Ramsar site? If a wetland fulfills certain criteria, such as, let's suppose, supporting 1% of a unique kind of population, being a center ground or a refuge for the migratory species of birds, that is when it is recognized as a Ramsar site. Once it is recognized as a Ramsar site, then it provides or it is provided with better recognition and also raising of awareness, which leads to better conservation practices as well. Details of it we have discussed again in the Saturday session of monthly current affairs for environment. You can refer to that. Now, in Assam, the region of the Rovmari Dondua wetland, right? Rovmari Dondua wetland, that is in the region of Assam, basically in the region of Laukhova and Burhachapori Wildlife Sanctuary. In that area, this wetland has got a lot of migratory species such as the purshad, the black-necked stork, the knob-billed duck. All of them have been known to coming there, and that is why the students, the youth, and the experts in the region, they want the Rovmari Dondua wetland to be recognized as the Ramsar site. It is situated slightly in the region close to Mayong. Now, Tri Services Exercise Trishul begins today to strengthen joint combat preparedness. Now, this is a tri service exercise which India has initiated, led by the Navy, joined by the Air Force, as well as the armed forces and the Army. Now, this is to test their combat readiness and their jointness in action. Now, where will it be carried out? In the region of northern Indian Ocean. In the region of northern Indian Ocean, around the area of Sir Creek, the disputed region of Sir Creek, extending all the way till the region of Rajasthan. You have modern fighters like the Rafale jets and the Sukhoi 30 MKIs, which have been mobilized for this. Large number of T-90 tanks, the other main battle tanks of the Indian Army, they will also be deployed. You have the landing pad docks like INS Jalashwa of the Navy, which also will be deployed. And that is where India has declared a NOTAM, notice to airmen, for this particular region. Having said that, Pakistan is quite riled up by this Trishul tri service exercise that India is hosting. That is why Pakistan has also, in the same time, launched or initiated its own naval exercise in the region of Arabian Sea, but that is largely to monitor India's actions and to observe carefully India's strategic assets. As you can see in the map here, the Pakistani airspace in the entirety of the region also will remain closed. So think about it. India's tri-service exercise has managed to close the entirety of Pakistani airspace. They want to study the strategic assets of India, and they are worried that in the garb of this, India might launch an offensive across the region of Sir Creek. Now, ICMR seeks partners to develop antibody against the Nipah virus. Now, ICMR has invited the various different partners to develop monoclonal antibody for the Nipah virus. What is a monoclonal antibody? It is like a silver bullet. For example, if you have any kind of a disease, it is like an antibody which will take care of that virus. Now, Nipah virus is one of those diseases which, or a communicable disease, which has had frequent outbreaks in our country for the past few years, with a mortality rate which is as high as 40% to 75%. That is very high mortality rate. Mind you, COVID, the coronavirus pandemic, that had a mortality rate of low single digit. This has got a mortality rate of 40% to 75%. Many of the caregivers, the healthcare workers, the family members, they get impacted by taking care of the patients, and they also face the sad eventuality. That is why they want the monoclonal antibodies to be developed. Now, in this particular case, what is Nipah virus is something very briefly we will focus upon. So, Nipah virus is something which spreads from the fruit bats or even from the pigs. Right. Now, the fruit bat, what they do, they consume some of the fruits. Partially, they consume some of the fruits and let it be as it is. Now, as a consequence, the Nipah virus spreads in these fruits, partially eaten fruits from the forest produce, and so on. Now, once any person, forest dwellers in general, when they consume those fruits, they will be impacted by the Nipah virus. After that, it follows a human to human transition and it can spread very, very quickly, very fast. So, that is the case of the Nipah virus. So, it is a zoonotic virus can jump from animal to human, and thereafter, human to human transmission can take place. Close contact with the infected animals, its bodily fluids, or even the contaminated food. So you have various different signs and symptoms like fever, headache, then muscle pain, and so on. And here, the treatment is only the treatment of the symptoms. That is why you need an antibody which can treat the virus in completion. Okay? Now, Prime Minister to launch 1 lakh crore fund at Science Conclave today, where you have the first emerging science and technology innovation conclave 2020. Okay. Emerging Science and Technology Innovation Conclave. Now, this is the first of its kind. It will be held annually, right? Annually. And for that, 1 lakh crore fund will be provided, and a kind of a fund will be launched for the emerging technologies in order to encourage research and development in the emerging technology area. Now, in the pictures today, in the science page, you have this image of water lettuce. It is an invasive alien species plant, water lettuce. Now, the image shows water lettuce being removed from a pond in El Salvador. Now, what is water lettuce? And why is it considered to be damaging? So, you see, this water lettuce, what it does, it basically grows very quickly in a pond, in a water body. As it grows, it will block the availability of sunlight. Now, the sunlight won't be able to penetrate underwater. As the sunlight won't be able to penetrate, means what? The aquatic plants which were growing underwater in the ponds, these aquatic plants, they will start to die. Now, mind you, these aquatic plants would otherwise have produced oxygen in the water, which would have been used by the aquatic species like fishes. But because of lack of availability of sunlight, the oxygen provision also stops. As a consequence, the entire water becomes deoxygenated or hypoxic. And that gets converted into a kind of a dead zone. So, why does this water lettuce grow? It grows whenever you have excess nutrients or eutrophication, excess nitrates from agricultural runoff, untreated sewage, phosphate that gets provided in a water body. Water lettuce starts to grow. It is an invasive alien species which turns the water body toxic and turns it into a dead zone, and eventually can also be a breeding ground for many mosquitoes. Now, Canada and Philippines, they signed key defense pact in order to deter China, particularly in order to ensure freedom of navigation around the Scarborough Shoal and around the disputed region of the South China Sea. That is why Philippines is bolstering support from global members and global nations. And that is why Canada, being one of those nations, mind you, Philippines has also gotten some BrahMos batteries from India. So that is where it is targeting the defense robustness against the Chinese Navy. And Chinese Navy, in its aggressive maneuvers, have already led to substantial skirmishes between the Philippines and the Chinese Navy professionals and the vessels across the Scarborough Shoals and other such disputed regions. Then, Russia's new nuclear submarine with doomsday missile has been unveiled. Now, what is this nuclear submarine? That is not that important. However, the name is Khabarovsk. But the doomsday missile, what is also known as the Poseidon nuclear drone. Now, Poseidon nuclear drone is a very unique kind of a weapon system. Now, this nuclear drone would travel underwater, and it would travel underwater at a speed of close to around 115 miles per hour, which is massive. And as this would travel underwater, it would detonate near the coastal areas, or it can emerge above and detonate as well. If it emerges or if it detonates underwater, it can give rise to a tsunami which can devastate and completely wipe out the coastal city and the coastal countries. So that is why it is considered to be a doomsday missile. That once this missile is launched, there is no saving of the coastal city. So it is a kind of a weapon of mass development being developed in the 21st century. Now, mind you, this is the Khabarov nuclear submarine. Okay? Now, then the last article of the day. The Chinese, they have sent its most youthful astronaut at the age of 32. So three astronauts, along with certain mice, they have been sent across the Tiangong space mission. That is the Chinese space mission and the Chinese space station. Now, China has basically been operating a three person crew across the space station who are replaced every 6 months. So this indicates increased space prowess and ambition of the Chinese. And they plan to have a crewed mission to the moon by 2030 with the aim of establishing a permanent base there. So that is again a kind of a call or wake up call for the space race emerging in the region of South Asia, where India has got a lot of catching up to do. The name of the space station is relevant, that is the Tiangong station. And also the fact that mice have been launched along with the astronauts for experimentation purposes. So that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the discussion was meaningful, helpful, and has added content to your existing knowledge set. If you have liked the session, put that in the comment section below. And don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. We meet again tomorrow. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.